All right, let's jump into it. So I'm Ryan Weinkoop. I am educational technology advisor for Purdue Extension. The majority of my time is spent helping do trainings to use all the technology we have that we can use in our programming or when we're planning programming, all that kinds of stuff. And so one of those things that we do a lot, as I mentioned, is webinars. We have a couple systems we can use to do webinars. There's different ways we can lead and host webinars and online meetings and things. And so that's what we'll do today. So we'll start out by discussing some best practices for hosting webinars in Extension, not necessarily just educational webinars, but even online meetings, because we do that a lot. We'll talk about some different and experience some different methods to make webinars a little more engaging for participants, so it's not just a narrated PowerPoint. And then we'll look at some tools that we can use to help us plan webinars and online meetings, and also then evaluate them once we're done. So if you have any questions, again, throughout, make sure you stop me. I'll be watching the chat, or you can unmute yourself and tell me to slow down or recover something. So we're going to start off by doing some polls here. So you see here on the screen, there's a little website here at the top, pollev.com/RyanW318. You can visit that on your smartphone, on your tablet, open up another tab on your computer, on your browser, whatever it is you want to do. Go ahead and visit that site there, and I'm going to get some information about all of you and use that to fuel our discussion. So this question is about how many webinars are you a participant in each year? So how many, in an average year, how many webinars do you participate in? Okay, so quite a few. As I suspected and as I mentioned, we do a lot of webinars because we do a lot of training online. We also participate in webinars, to gain more information, but to learn from others, nationwide webinars, all that stuff. So keep this site open because there's a couple more questions here. I'll give you a few more minutes to respond. Okay. Interesting. So about almost 3/4, well, almost 90% of us are doing almost a webinar a month. Okay, next question. How many webinars do you host in a year? So same link. Okay. Okay, so it looks like almost 3/4 of us are doing 1 to 3 a year, and then it trails off from there. Okay, very good. Good to know. All right, and the next question is usually everyone's favorite. We can get moving forward here. What are some of your webinar frustrations? You can respond as many times as you'd like to this one. And your responses will show up, so be courteous. Yes. People not muting. That is one of my pet peeves. Yep. Technical difficulties, presenters not engaging. Yep. Oh yeah, buffering. Yeah. For those of you who are around for Adobe Connect that we used to have 10 years ago or so, that was the worst. Yeah. Difficult to manage participation. Yep. People not muting. Yep. Audio variable quality. Yep. Lack of participation. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. You can tell people are listening, but they're multitasking. I think it's just natural that we multitask on webinars, right? Dry and detached, not confident with tech. That's a good one. We'll discuss that. Very good. Sometimes difficult to read text on the screen. Yep. Less a webinar, more panel. Very good. Very good. So you can keep responding to that if you want. You can throw your feedback in there. I'll kind of compile that and send that out along with the recording so others can see that. But there's some good information. Oh yeah, how to handle multiple people and speak at a time. That's a good point. We can talk about that. So very good. Thank you all for participating in that. So that's another sample that, like I mentioned, I wanted to get some feedback from you, but that's also another demonstration of how you can engage with your participants on a webinar. So let's just jump right in. These are tips for a great webinar. So these are just 8 that I've come up with. I threw in some bonus tips throughout. We'll talk about those. I would also, again, like you to share in your tips. Some of these are common sense. Some of them are a little more in-depth that we'll dive into a little more. And this webinar isn't about how to use a particular web conferencing software. It's more about the mechanics and practice of hosting a webinar. So basically, leading and hosting or teaching a webinar online. So we're not going to talk about how to use WebEx or how to use Zoom. We're going to talk about these tips here. So if there are any questions later about how to use a specific software, we can do that at another time. Okay, let's jump right in. So first of all, I just want to make clear that webinars are really no different than face-to-face, okay? The only big difference is it's a different platform, right? We're all inside of our computer instead of face-to-face. Everything you do for a webinar should be about the same as you would do for face-to-face. So keep in mind those presentation basics. What is the purpose and what are the objectives of your webinar? Can you do the topic you want to do in a webinar? Does it make sense? Is it going to be effective? And who should attend that webinar? Think about your audience. These are all the basics of presenting, having a meeting, all that stuff. Think about advertisement too. Again, we advertise our extension programs a lot, social media, newspapers, TV, however it is, you can do it in your local area. But think about advertising your webinar, getting the right amount of participants. Sometimes you can have too many participants in the webinar. Not having enough can be an issue too, but we can talk about that later. So consider all those. That's basic program planning, common sense kind of stuff, but it's still things you have to keep into account when you do a webinar. Also consider how will you intro and close your webinar. So how will you start it out, how will you close it, what are some things that you'll do? Will you have a co-host? We'll go more in-depth into co-host in a little bit and a few more tips, but really strongly consider having a co-host. I don't have one today because I didn't follow my advice, but have a co-host. Will you share materials? So again, face-to-face, we share a lot of materials. We share publications, we share handouts, we share websites, whatever it might be. You can still distribute those things in a webinar. You just have to consider how you will do it. Will you email them in advance to the participants if you know them, if you did registration? Can you create a quick landing page, maybe with Adobe Spark or Google Sites? So it's just a quick website people can go to, or if you have a program website or your county site, can you drop the materials there? Will you send it out afterwards? So take all that into account. Think about how you'll distribute that information, those materials. And then finally, just like in our face-to-face programs, how will you know it was successful? Will you do an evaluation, all that stuff? Keep that in mind as you're doing your webinar. We often we do our webinar and we're done and we move on. We forget to figure out if it was effective or not. So keep those in mind. Again, those are all kind of the common sense things that we do in face-to-face that kind of carry over into our online webinar opportunities. So here's a chance for you to interact now and engage. Answer in the chat, how long, in your opinion, should a webinar be? Okay. 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Oh, welcome, Anna, Rosie. I didn't see you all come in. Missed you there. Hello. Gail, welcome. Great. Excellent answer. So you all kind of hit it right on the head. It depends on your content, of course, but don't go longer than an hour. That's an hour is stretching it even. You can probably keep it even shorter. You can only pack so much content into a webinar, just as in face-to-face, you can only pack so much content in. The webinars tend to be a little lighter, so don't pack in too much, but keep it short. you're sitting there staring at a screen for an hour, it's hard on your eyes as well. So that's stuff to keep in mind. Thank you all for participating. Thank you. All right, so an hour long is kind of the standard. Again, we can go shorter, but there's actually a template that will help you plan your webinar. So I'm going to drop a link here in the chat for you all to view. I'm going to bring it up here on the screen. So this is a 1-hour webinar planning template. I did not create this. This is from my colleagues at University of Minnesota Extension Tech. But it's very simple, but it helps you be more intentional about planning your webinar. So it's broken down into chunks. So the first 10 minutes is an intro, there's interactions, lecture activity. So you can adjust this as you need to if you're gonna have a shorter webinar or longer. You don't have to follow it to the T, of course, but this helps you be more intentional about building in those activities, those interactions, those things that you can do to help engage your participants, but it also helps you kind of plan out what you're going to talk about so you're not just going into it blind and winging it. So this is downloadable. This is in Google Drive. With this link I sent you, you should be able to save it or download it or print it, whatever you want to do. Use it to make your own template, however you want. But it's a tool that's helpful. I'll show you mine that I created for this webinar. This is very deep, sort of like matrix kind of stuff. This is a webinar about webinars, and this is my webinar template about webinars. So here's what I did, just to kind of help me plan it out. I'm not gonna follow this to the T. It's all flexible, but you can see what I did at the beginning. I welcomed all of you. If I saw you, had you introduce yourselves in the chat. But it's very planned out. Again, I won't follow this, but it just helped me think about adding interaction to the webinar. So you don't have to do that. This is just a tool that could be useful. I'm just showing you what I did. Bring this back up. So planning, again, as we do, we plan face-to-face opportunities and presentations, so make sure you plan your online presentation the same way. Here we go, have a sidekick. So, oops, let me get my notes back up here. Have a sidekick. There's a couple reasons to have a sidekick. One, they can help manage participants. A couple of us said a frustration is people not muting themselves. We particularly have this issue in WebEx. People not muting themselves or calling in, it causes really bad call quality. So if you have a co-host, you can make them co-host in the system. They can mute people, unmute people, stuff like that. They can monitor the chat. So if there's questions, they can check things. They can answer those questions in the chat while the webinar is happening if they're knowledgeable about the topic. Or when you get to a time for question and answer, they can help sort of moderate that chat. They can help co-present. So if they're knowledgeable on the topic, you can tag team it. They can share some content while you monitor the chat, vice versa. They also serve as a backup connection. So if you are presenting and your internet quits or your computer quits or whatever, you have that co-host who can sort of fill in the void. They can pick up the presentation so it's not so awkward for the participants and they don't just sit there wondering what to do and you lose them all. So a co-host can be helpful in that instance as well. Are there any questions so far? Feel free to type them in the chat or unmute. So again, webinars are no different than face-to-face. You need to practice. For those of us who have made presentations for many years or have been teaching workshops and stuff like that, you might be able to just wing it in a face-to-face setting. You might be comfortable doing that, but webinars are a little different. You can probably wing the content if you're very knowledgeable about the content, but you need to practice winging it in an online environment if you don't do it often. In my opinion, 90% of a webinar's effectiveness comes from the host being familiar with the platform. And I think someone mentioned in the frustrations about tech problems and difficulties managing the room. It's just like face-to-face. If you lose your audience in a face-to-face setting, you've lost them for the rest of the time. If you have struggles and issues at the beginning of your webinar with the platform, you're going to lose people. They're not going to pay attention. So you have to practice, particularly if you're going to have guest speakers. I have been on webinars where there have been guest speakers who absolutely bombed because they had no idea what they were doing in the system because they clearly hadn't practiced with the host beforehand. So if you're going to have a guest speaker, run them through a week before, an hour before the webinar, whatever it is, make sure they know what they're doing, make sure they can advance their slides or you have a system to do that. Just do not let them come into your webinar unpracticed. So again, make sure you're comfortable with the platform. Oops. So you can unmute and share, or you can type in the chat, whichever you like. When should a host, well, what time or what point in time should a host join the webinar? Any thoughts? 5 minutes before, okay.
This is Claire here. Can you hear me?
Oops, and my volume. What was that, Claire?
Can you, my suggestion is maybe 15 minutes at the earliest beforehand, because a lot of times I've joined a meeting early only to become the host unwittingly when I'm not hosting.
I'm not hearing Claire.
So
maybe it's on
early is good.
So 10 to 15 minutes prior to start. Very good. Okay, yeah. And when should participants join the webinar? Sort of gave this answer away already this morning. 5 minutes, yep. Very good, awesome. You all got it. So in general, here's some guidelines. If you're going to have a guest speaker, again, try and join maybe a half hour early just to get your guest speaker on, solve any technical issues, any problems you might have there. Without a guest speaker, if you're really comfortable with the platform, you don't have any issues, you could probably squeak by 10 minutes early, 10 to 15 minutes early. You just want to log in, make sure everything is working, make sure all of it's good to go, get your presentation up, anything like that. Attendees, try and get in at least 5 minutes early. Why 5 minutes early? Well, because after the webinar has started, and if you join after the webinar has started, it is not the host's responsibility to be your personal geek squad. So if you have sound issues, if you have audio, video issues, it's not the host's responsibility to troubleshoot your issues. So join in early so you can get those figured out, make sure everything is working, and not interrupt the webinar. And again, like I put in my email this morning to remind you, I encourage you to join 5 minutes early, so that's always a good practice to do a pre-notice for the webinar. Encourage your attendees to come in 5 minutes early, that way you can take care of any of those issues. Bonus tip, set up a confidence monitor. So what I mean by confidence monitor is, I'll turn on my camera here so you can see. Whenever I do a webinar, I always have my iPad up and I log in. So you see one of the participants in here is test, that's my iPad. So I keep it here in front of me so I can see what you all are seeing. That way I know that if I say something's on the screen and it's not, I can see that. But have either another laptop logged in, or if you have a co-host, they're logged in, they can see. That always just helps. It's a little confidence monitor, like when you're presenting at a presentation and they have that little TV there for you to see, like a teleprompter. It's just a quick little tip. That's what I use, and it helps me out a lot. Okay, next tip. Introduction. So this is important. So we know that online presentations are difficult. Turn this off. We know online presentations are different. A lot of our clientele, our customers might not be accustomed to it. We're all pretty comfortable with it because we have webinars all the time in Extension. But the way you start out your webinar can have a huge impact on your learners and participants. So again, welcome them as they arrive. Just as you would in a face-to-face presentation, you wouldn't just be in your program area and people walk in and you just ignore them. You say hello. So do that online. I did that on here. For those of you who got in early, I typed in the chat and said hello, or I unmuted myself and said hello. So I tried to catch everyone as they came in. Have yourself on camera for that. That helps people see who you are, but it also shows your face. It shows how genuine you are when you're welcoming them and saying hello. Make sure you do that. It just kind of makes a difference, especially if people are uncomfortable with webinars, participating in them. And then share that webinar housekeeping. Again, we're all used to participating in webinars, so it's generally, second nature to us to make sure we mute ourselves and how to chat and all that. But share those quick tips at the beginning just so people know how to interact with you. Should they unmute themselves? Should they type in the chat? All those kinds of things. Bonus tip, check your background. This is sort of when, we all have messy offices. Some of us might not. So check your background. This picture on the screen is not an appropriate background for a webinar if you're presenting a professional webinar on behalf of Purdue Extension. You notice my background. It's just kind of a backdrop, a little sheet. I made just a little background that I can have behind me when I'm doing webinars so it looks a little cleaner and nicer. If your office is nice and it's clean, that's fine. There's no problem there, but just check your background to make sure it looks professional. So make it interactive. So we've tried to do this a little bit. That the template I shared with you said do 2 interactions every 10 minutes. That's completely variable. It depends on the topic you're covering. It depends on your audience, all that stuff. But try to have interactions as much as possible. So whether that's stopping for a poll, stopping to ask questions, doing an activity, whatever it might be. Make sure you change something on the screen every so often. Don't be very text heavy. This is again back to face-to-face presentations. Don't pack too much text on there. Give something for people to look at. Some stimulus variation. Include images if you're using PowerPoint. And then it's okay to get out of PowerPoint too. It's okay to just not have a presentation and just have your face up and talk and share information and have other people talk and ask questions. So it's okay to use a webinar to have dialogue. So here are some different interactions. And so we're going to show some of these, and then you're going to get a chance to share if you have any. So these are just some on the screen. I'm going to show you now. We're using Zoom. A lot of you everyone has WebEx, but we're using Zoom today. And it actually has a breakout room feature where if you have a large webinar and you want people to be broken up into groups, it'll do it automatically for you, and you can all go into your own little room and talk and say hello. So we're going to try this real quick. We're going to see how this goes, just so you can experience it. But I want you to experience it to see how you might be able to use it in a future opportunity. I'm going to click some buttons here. Let's see. Let's do that automatically and create rooms. Okay. So you all, in just a second, are going to be transported into a different room, and you'll be able to talk and say hello to each other. I'll give you a couple seconds to experience it, and then I'll bring you back in. Hello, breakout room 1. So I can join your room as the host of the meeting. I can join any room I want. So I'm joining your room just to say hello. I'm going to leave and I'm going to join another room. Hello, breakout room 2. You can join in different rooms. The host can, so I'm joining your room just to say hello, and now I'm going to leave and join another room.
All righty, thank you.
Hello, breakout room, is this 3? Breakout room 3, so I'm just showing you the host can join any breakout room they want, and then they can leave and join another room. Okay, we'll get everyone back in here. So there are some opportunities to use that for different, I know HHS has used this before to do some planning, but it's just a great way to kind of make smaller breakout rooms if you're doing some strategizing and you want to break people out, to have small group discussions. Sometimes more people are more comfortable with talking in small groups as opposed to sharing to a big webinar of 50 people. So that's just one strategy you can use. There's another thing you can do, so I've done this before on webinars, if you have a small group and you want to do some brainstorming, you can, let me get my chat open here, you can share a Google Doc. So I'll drop a Google Doc in here. If you want to join, you can do that. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Let me get this here. So throw that in there. So if you want people to brainstorm, share ideas, you can do a collaborative Google Doc so everyone could join in. You can all share ideas, you can all type things, whatever it is you want to do. So this is an option if you're working on a document, everyone can see it, whatever it is you want to do there. Get back here. So there are also some other features in various different web conferencing platforms. So poll questions, Zoom has poll features. You can only do multiple choice and only, you can do single choice or multiple choice. Again, ask questions, breakout rooms, play videos, let participants share their screens if there's something they want to share, use a whiteboard or Google Doc, or have a guest speaker presenter. So at this time, if anyone has any other things that they do in webinars to encourage interaction or to promote discussion, let's hear them. Great question by Chase. So if we were to watch the recording later at a later time, what would be displayed when we go to breakout rooms? I'll be honest with you, I don't know, because I've never recorded a meeting where there's been breakout rooms. So I will find out the answer for you and let you know. But I'll also share this recording with everyone so we can all just watch it and find out together.
I also had a question, Ryan. When we were in the breakout, is chat while you're in the
WebEx has breakout rooms or not? I can't remember. So has anyone else tried any or have any good tactics for engaging or interacting with participants in webinars?
Can no one hear me?
It's okay if you don't. Oh, try again.
Can you hear me, Ryan?
There we go. Now I got you.
All right. So I did have a question. When we were in the breakout rooms, does the chat work just for the people in the breakout, or is it for everyone?
I believe it's just in that particular chat room.
Okay, so you guys can't see what Rosie Lerner had written at 10:25?
Oh, I did see that, but I don't know if that's because I'm the host.
Okay. Just a logistics question. Sorry, not that important.
No, that's a good question. No. Yeah, so when you're doing breakout rooms, you obviously want the people in that room to be able to interact with each other. So that's a feature, obviously, since not everyone has Zoom in Purdue Extension, it's not a widely used feature. So I've only played with it a few times, but there are quite a few folks that use it. Rosie says, yes, it's just a breakout room. Okay, perfect. Okay, Claire only saw it for those that were in the breakout room. Okay, yeah, great. Any other questions, ideas, or thoughts on interactions in webinars? Okay. Well, if you have any other ideas, feel free to share those. Zoom versus WebEx. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Rosie? Preference and why. WebEx is just complicated. It just looks intimidating. To me, it's way harder to schedule a meeting than it needs to be in WebEx. We also tend to have lots of connection issues with WebEx, very choppy sometimes, no matter what the connection speed is. Zoom is just easier. It's easier to join as a participant. It's easier to schedule meetings. It's been a lot better connection-wise, as far as I know. To join, it doesn't have some of the features that WebEx has, but it's a lot easier to use. That's just my preference. Recordings in Zoom, you actually have two options, and the recordings are significantly easier in Zoom too. For WebEx, you have to go on like a 3-day journey just to find your recordings sometimes. But for Zoom, you can record it straight to your computer, and the file is just there. And then you have that file, you can upload it to a website, you can put it on YouTube, whatever it is you want to do. Zoom also has a great feature where you can store it in the cloud, and then you can actually set it, and WebEx has this feature too, but it's overly complicated. Zoom, you can store your recordings in the cloud, and then you can actually set it so that people have to register to watch the recording, so you know who has watched your recording then as well. But you can also just share a simple link, and people can watch it online too. So it's super simple, way simpler than WebEx. So. Great questions. All right, we're almost done with our tips. So once you've done your webinar, after you've completed it and you're done, take some time to debrief, just like we would do after our face-to-face sessions. What went well? What could we improve? Make sure you follow up with the participants. So if you say you're going to send a recording, send that recording within at least 48 hours so they don't forget about it. If you have no editing to do, you can just share the link as soon as it's available. Share any handouts you said you would give. You can attach those to the email, whatever it is you want to do. You can also, if you want to get more in depth and be like a rock star webinar person, there's also this other tool available. I'll share it here on the screen and drop it in the chat. There's also this tool available from our colleagues in Minnesota. They created this. This one will really break your brain, Terry, because it's way more intense. But it's a webinar evaluation rubric. So this is really more for like in-depth, super duper, like high quality professional webinars. But it's really good to give you some criteria to just kind of look at, to think about your webinars in general. So thinking about the technology, tools, distractions, materials, all that stuff. So again, this is in the Google Drive, so you can download it if you want, or you can share it to your own drive or print it, whatever you would like. But it's just nice to read through, just to kind of consider some things that you might not have thought about before for your webinar. We've covered some of the things that are in here already in our tips, but there's a few other things in here that we haven't covered, so you might want to take some time to go through that. Oops, get that back up here. All right. And then one question I always get that ties into our last point that I already mentioned, people always ask me when I do my trainings, I make people register for them and say, why do you make us register for your trainings? Well, there's a couple reasons, and we've probably all experienced it before. How many of you can type in the chat yes or say hello, how many of you have scheduled a webinar or even a face-to-face session and nobody showed up? Did it ever happen to anyone? Yep. Yeah. So why do I do registration? Because then I know if anyone's going to show up. So for example, today I think I had like 24 people register. So I knew, okay, well, at least there'll probably be at least 5 people that will show up to the webinar. So I'll go ahead and do it. But what happens is if you're doing a public webinar, for the external, for the public, for content or whatever, you can use a lot of that data. So you can ask specific questions. So first of all, you can find out if people are interested in it, if they're registering. And then you can ask specific questions about, your topic area if you want to get some information ahead of time. But you can also get some more in-depth data. WebEx is actually better in this aspect for the in-depth data of webinar participants. You can find out who didn't join. You can find out if they stayed the whole time, if they logged out early. You can find out, if they interacted in the chat, if they voted in the polls. And then you can use all that information, all that data to follow up with them afterwards because you have their email address. So you can use that. But you can use this data again for future webinars. So for example, I know that by all of you signing up for this webinar about webinars, you might potentially be interested in a webinar or a training about how to use different web conferencing softwares. So if I were to offer that training in the future, I could use this list and email all of you and say, hey, check out this upcoming training about how to use WebEx. Thought you might be interested. So it's just another way to help you get more free advertising, basically, or a list of people to reach out to for future webinars. So recap, we're going to keep this short. So again, there's some quick principles, quick practices to keep in mind. Make sure you consider those when you are doing your webinars, and you will have fantastic, super wonderful webinars in the future, I guarantee you. That's all. I'm trying to follow my own advice and keep it to 45 minutes or so. So at this time, what we will do is open for questions, ideas, thoughts, whatever you might have. Great question, Rosie. So can anyone use the Poll Everywhere tool? Yes, absolutely. There are some limitations to it, of course. And then you, of course, want to decide if it's good for your webinar. I'll log in here real quick so you can see. It's free to use. However, on a free plan, you are limited to 25 responses. So if you're having a small webinar, it's not a big issue. You can upgrade to the higher education plan, and that gives you 40 responses. So you can see here, heads up, this account's limited to 40 responses. But yeah, anyone can use this. They have awesome, cool question types that you can do some really neat things, so you can play around with that. And then since I use Google Slides, I don't like PowerPoint, Poll Everywhere has a plugin where I can I'll show you what that looks like here. So I can just embed my Poll Everywhere polls right into the presentation. so I didn't have to stop and switch to a website. It was just natively embedded and kept the flow a little cleaner, so there was less switching of pages. Any other questions or thoughts, ideas? So Lenny wants to know if anyone's used a QR code to send people to a site like Qualtrics. Anyone out there tried it? Yeah, so QR codes, they've been around for a while. I don't really use them. I do know, I think Claire actually shared this tip. I didn't realize it. I think it's just iPhones though. If you just open your camera and hold your iPhone up on a QR code, it automatically scans it. I'm an Android guy, so I don't get that luxury. And so I would have to download a QR code scanner app and open it up and scan it and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, QR codes certainly are another way to help drive traffic to particular places.
With regards to QR codes, I see that as being like the 8-track of the music world. Is there, like, people, they want to use it, but it just, I don't see people actually using it. Is there, am I missing something, or?
I personally don't like QR codes. I never use them. I don't encourage people to use them. So I'm kind of with you on that.
Is there a really great alternative, though, that people are using?
Honestly, short links, because people are texting on their phones pretty much all day long. So to open up Chrome and type in a short link and go, or open up your browser on your phone, in my opinion, is just as easy as for me on Android having to stop, open up an app, scan the code, and then go there. So it's really personal preference. You know, it's Diet Coke or Pepsi or Coca-Cola. But I agree with you. QR codes, I don't like them. Any other questions, thoughts, ideas on webinars? Things you've tried? Advice on screen sharing. Can you want to elaborate a little more on that, Daniel? Should it be avoided? Well, it depends on what you're sharing. So, for example, if you're sharing a presentation, obviously you're going to want to share that. If you're sharing a website or showing people a website, you can share that. Just make sure you're not sharing your screen onto one thing the entire time, because people aren't going to pay attention or they're going to get bored. So again, have that stimulus variation where you try to change things up every so often. Don't change things too fast, because it can make people sick with all this constant screen switching and sharing. So be intentional about what you are sharing, but I think webinars, you have to share your screen in order to demonstrate or show what it is you're doing. Anyone else have thoughts on that? Oh, a document cam in webinar. I have never used a document cam in a webinar before. It does seem like it would be awkward. You can, now in Zoom, they do have that. Yeah, that takes a lot of coordination. Zoom does have a feature for sharing where you can actually share an image from a second camera, and the image that they show is like a document camera, but I've never used it, so I don't know how it works. But yeah, that's definitely an instance where I would need to practice prior to a webinar. Yeah, let me know if you want to tinker around with it, Rosie. I'll be happy to come play. That'd be interesting. I just want to try that out. Okay, Well, we are closing in on the 45-minute mark, so I won't take any more people's time. I will stay around if you have more questions. I'm happy to stay. But if you're done, if you've gotten everything you need to know, or if you want to hang around for questions, you can. But otherwise, we'll call it quits, and I will send out the recording and all of these resources to you in email since you've registered, and you can start planning your next webinar. So thank you all for participating. I'll hang around. Otherwise, you're welcome to go.